Hi guys, welcome to Snakes and Adders. Welcome back to the intermediate series. This is episode 22. We're discussing the red blood python, Python brongersmai today, also known as the Malaysian red blood python. This species is available in a range of colour and pattern mutations. This is an example of a matrix blood python, which is the heterozygous form of an ivory blood python. It's just breathtakingly beautiful, as you can see, completely stunning. I'm going to probably not be able to hold this for the entire video because as we will talk about later, these animals have a fuse which gets lit pretty easy, so I have a finite amount of time to be able to hold this snake. The ivory is a partially leucistic snake, beautiful, like whites with black speckling, really sought after. But red blood pythons are hardly ugly, even in their natural form. They're absolutely breathtaking, one of nature's most beautiful pythons. Animals originating from Bangka Island and Penang Island are particularly sought after because of their deep blood reds instead of the more common oranges, as you can see here. This is about the best example we can give of a sit and wait predator. Massively powerful, with a large head and huge girth for its length. Means that this snake is a formidable foe if you're unlucky enough to be its prey. We can feed blood pythons, rodents throughout their life, and without issue generally. There's no real need to go huge with meals. Because of their sedentary nature, keepers now opt to use a median temperature to maintain them. For example, no basking spot. A pretty even 28 to 29 Celsius across the width of the enclosure. And this is also bore out in the climate data, which we'll discuss later on. Barker and Barker note how important airflow is to blood pythons. Animals kept in wet environments perpetually are more prone to respiratory infections. Those wet and muddy enclosures with poor air circulation are a breeding ground for pathogens, bacteria and fungi. And this is where the classic juxtaposition between wild animals and captive animals exists. And this is the same for American water snakes, genus Neurodia, and the anacondas, genus Eunectes, because airflow is integral, and this is very hard to replicate in captivity whilst maintaining temperature. Humidity should be raised during shed cycles to allow easy removal of the old skin, but in day-to-day life it isn't really a huge issue. With water container present inside the tank that the animal can drink from and evaporating in that level temperature of 28 to 29 Celsius, the evaporation will raise the humidity level, particularly at the cool end, to between 60 and 70% anyway. If plastic boxes are to be used, the addition of ventilation is recommended. More preferable for larger animals is Vivaria with inherently better airflow. And these will need sealing though to avoid rot, not necessarily from water but from urine. Blood pythons are messy, both in terms of urine and faeces. The faeces do not arrive irregularly, but when they do, boy do you know about it, and you kind of wonder where it all came from. Substrates can prove problematic to keep clean for this reason, and you know, the urine will fester and smell in the more naturalistic enclosures where we're trying to use soil or core or sphagnum. And that should be borne in mind. In time, it may therefore become an expensive proposition to keep a blood python in this manner. If you want to use a substrate, use something relatively cheap and disposable, such as lignocell or orchid bark, rather than going for one of these posher bioactive setups. A lot of keepers, particularly with how prodigious the amounts of urine can be, they tend to just use newspaper and clean them out fairly regularly, and it's a cheap and disposable substrate, but not aesthetic in the least, and I don't pretend it is. This is an argument from a functionality and ease of maintenance argument. They can consume impressive size meals, but you don't necessarily need to push your luck with this theory. Animals up to a year of age can be fed weekly, animals older than this every 2 to 3 weeks. It's normal for a number of meals to be consumed without a bowel movement. Don't panic. When they go, they're going to go, and it will be big. It'll be like Shergar's visit at the tank. Sexual dimorphism is present, with females being heavier built and generally larger in all dimensions. Sexing is achieved by popping or probing, although a snake that is being non-compliant, this may prove to be a problem. Males will readily evert their hempines if they are stressed or in a defensive mode. So it kind of just depends on the individual, but for the most part they pretty readily avert their bits and pieces anyway, and just with a bit of gentle pressure we can usually coax at least the blood vessel sections out so that we can see what's going on. Red blood pythons breed later in the year in captivity than in the northern hemisphere than their cousins, the royal python. An impressive egg yield of 12 to 30 eggs is possible that further expand and swell during the incubation period of 31 to 32 degrees Celsius at 90 to 100% humidity for between 60 and 65 days. Babies are born with massive yolk sacs, and therefore feeding attempts don't really need to happen for at least 6 to 8 weeks, occasionally even longer. Baby bloods can take a while to shed that initial egg skin as well, and babies will accept medium or large mice as their first meal quite easily. Red blood pythons, Python brongersmai, I've definitely got the most mixed bag when it comes to temperament of the 3 blood species we encounter regularly. The others being the Borneo blood python, Python steini, and the short-tailed python or Sumatran python, which is Python curtus. Some are puppy dog tame that you can do anything with. Some are absolutely ferocious, and others have a fuse that is lit the moment that you pick them up. And for a set amount of time, they will be compliant, and then all hell will break loose when they've had enough. And it's literally like the most bipolar snake on earth. Natural distribution includes southern Thailand, western Malaysia, which is the peninsula or the Malay Peninsula, and northern Sumatra. I'll just pause there. We don't want you kicking off, do we? So I'm just going to pop it in a box. One of our customers has brought this in on holiday. What a fabulous specimen. Absolutely gorgeous. Wonderful head. Look at it. It's a phenomenal snake. Absolutely breathtaking. But I know that fuse is lit, so I'm going to put it in a box before we get any problems. Right, natural distribution, that's where I was. Southern Thailand, western Malaysia, the peninsula, Malay Peninsula, and northern Sumatra. In the extreme north of their range, they occur in the King Kraken Natural Park, which is up here, or King Kraken, I don't know how you'd want to pronounce that, and the Kuburi National Park slightly further south. So according to their distribution map, they do not occur in Myanmar, previously Burma. I think that's probably just down to a lack of data, as to they've not been in to actually be able to assess whether they're present or not. And that's kind of bore out with the hypotheses that I read about on the ICUN Red List and reptile database and such like as well. So it's just simply that there's not been any data. There have been recorded ones in Vietnam and Cambodia, but these were spurious at best, so probably best not to bear too much in mind. So we stretch from southern Thailand down onto the Malay Peninsula, and then northern Sumatra. So type locality is given as Singapore on the reptile database, but the ICUN Red List website lists this population as extinct. In fact, the Singapore population was only known by a single specimen recorded in 1881. Singapore's down here. Distribution is spread out and non-continuous, and basically what's hypothesized is that human movement of the species has contributed to this. It's policy in Thailand that if animals are intercepted, where we have illegal animal traffickers and traders, that they, as policy, are released into the nearest national park from their capture, meaning that we don't necessarily know if they were always present in those regions. And that's something that we you know, it's really spreading quite up there. And actually, as we look further on, we'll see that there are some changes temperature wise and climate wise, and this region here seems to be more typical of the blood pythons. Natural habitat is listed as lowland swamp, but reading Barker and Barker's notes on VPI.com, they seem to find them more abundant in the upland surrounding areas of these swamps. Shine in 1999 noted that they were abundant in the lowland areas of Sumatra, which had been heavily cleared for palm oil plantations. In fact, their numbers in these man-made scapes were far higher than that encountered in their natural habitat. They were drawn to these areas because of the far higher number of rats present. They call these commensal rats because they're associated with the humans. So you know, they were literally just benefiting from palm oil, about the only animal on earth I think that has. And yeah, they'd have been better off with their natural habitat, no doubt. This species is heavily harvested for leather, and it is under review as to whether the numbers killed can be sustained. In Sumatra, python brongersmai, red blood python, which we're discussing tonight, represents 92% of the pelt trade, with Curtis, the Sumatran blood python, just representing 8%. Some figures quote a harrowing 200,000 skins per year, which just can't be sustainable by anybody's standards. It's ridiculous. So now we'll just move on to weather data. And the weather data is for the region is as follows. We picked 6 locations throughout their accepted range, including one in the north where they've possibly been introduced, and we track from north to south. So the first being Keng Kraken, Thailand; Georgetown, Penang, Malaysia; Shah Alam, Selangor, Malaysia; Medan, North Sumatra, Indonesia; Padang, West Sumatra, Indonesia; and Bangka Island, Pangkal Pinang, Indonesia. And what we've decided to do is we've grouped them up with our daytime high table, our nighttime low table, and our rainfall, which is the average monthly millimeters of rainfall. As well as taking the averages for daytime high and nighttime low, when we plotted them out on our graph, we also put the median temperature, so that we can, for the people that are wanting to use the linear temperature model rather than a basking area that they can move to and from. Some keepers still do this, but there is definitely a movement with the blood python breeders to keep them at relatively linear temperatures, so we can see those temperatures there. So what we've done for the upper number and the lower number, we've literally just taken the averages. We've added up the total, divided it by the amount of sites, and this is what we came out with. Daytime highs starting in January: 30.8, 31.3, 31.8, 32, 32.5, 32.1, 31.6, 31.5, 31.3, 31.3, 30.8 and 30.6. So pretty linear, within 1.5 degrees. And the same story at night time. So actually this linear idea may bear out, because our nighttime lows pretty much hover between what we got, 23.5 and 24.67, so maybe 1.5 degrees. There's really not a whole heap in it. So the bit we're interested in, if we're going to do this linear stuff, is maybe looking at the median temperatures. So this is basking zone 3 and just a solid temperature across the whole width of the tank. 27.1, 27.5, 28, 28.3, 28.5, 28.4, 28, 27.75, 27.6, 27.6, 27.4, 27.1. So realistically, not a huge heap to pick from there. And then when we start looking at rainfall, we took the averages and we've plotted those out with this middle blue here being the average for the 6 sites. The southern 3 sites are predominantly wetter, so they would be the Indonesian locales, which are, just to recap, Medan, Padang and Bangka Island. The drier regions, which are the 3 northern sites, is this lower one here. What they still show in their trend lines is that we've got a wet season that occurs from September through December and then drops off again in February. I also looked at the reproductive husbandry of pythons and boas by Ross and Marzek, and this is the table they provided with the breeding data they recorded all those years ago in that fabulous book. If you don't have it, buy it. The Reproductive Husbandry of Pythons and Boas. Wonderful. So we can see how this ties in with a lot of our matings occurring just post dry season, just coming into this first peak. Egg laying, which is oviposition, is just prior to the monsoon season, which comes later on, and then the hatching out starts to occur right as we hit monsoon season, where in theory the prey that they would feast upon would be at its most prevalent. So temperatures probably really don't come into it. There is a season, it is later on, and it is the trigger point. So you might find they don't necessarily always click and breed at the same time. And yeah, it quite possibly with us being Northern Hemisphere here, or if you're in the US, we can use low pressure fronts, tropical storms. I know you get some pretty hefty storms over in the US. We can use them to our advantage, open all the windows, let the pressure in the house drop, introduce the snakes, give them a good spray so it's nice and damp and off they trot. Generally, once they start feeding, which there can be a delay, the yolk sac is big. They don't always want to take defrost prey as their first meal, so just bear that in mind. There may be a bit of playing, but once you start and they kick in, they're okay. In actual fact, for such a stroppy snake, as they get bigger, they can be quite shy and gun shy when they're babies. They don't always want to strike and wrap. Sometimes they will just want to hoover up, so make sure they feel lovely and secure. A nice, relatively small box that they feel safe in, just while we establish them on the food, and then we can move them up into bigger tanks. A lot of keepers try to keep them in these tiny rack boxes, and in actual fact, for airflow and everything else that we've already discussed, it's probably beneficial to give them quite a bit of room. A nice adult snake should be in a 4x2x2 easily. Heating more than likely can be provided by ceramic heat emitters, or things like the microclimate advanced heating system, which offers sort of a median temperature, or maybe even the tubular heaters, but these would also all need to be on thermostats to make sure that we've got control over the temperatures. Do your research as always. Python brongersmai, absolutely fantastic snake. Superb as a next step snake, and certainly can be a bit more of a challenge with its temperament, so definitely not a beginner species, but wonderfully rewarding. And if you want a snake that's got an incredible head, incredible girth and build and weight, and is super impressive, but doesn't necessarily take up the whole house like a retic or a Burmese or an African rock would, then a blood python would be a really sensible choice. You get out what you put in, and if you put the time in, you could end up with a totally tame snake, so bear that in mind as well. As always, keep following us at Snakes and Adders. We'll see you again soon with another video. All the best, guys. Cheers.